Hi there everyone, welcome. It's Lotus. Welcome to this video on All Hallows Eve, otherwise known as Samhain, and on the eve of the Scorpio new moon, which is tomorrow. So before we begin, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has subscribed to the channel, who's sending me likes. It's helping me to know my alignment and who my people are, and to keep the communication coming. And I really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed, I would love to have you here. Also, I have started posting some things in the community page. So I am wanting to grow that a little bit more and offer special teachings there and inspiration and just communication with anybody who'd like to share anything about your spiritual path, your spiritual journey. And just FYI, the new moon meditation and light language activation has been loaded now, and I'm going to put that link underneath this video so it is there for you to begin working with if you feel called. So we're working with the energies of darkness. Okay, we're coming into the darkening of our year in the Northern Hemisphere. So the cross quarter of Samhain actually begins to put us into the threshold, right? We're in the threshold into the darkness more fully. We're right in the middle between equinox, autumn equinox, and winter solstice. So right now we're becoming really aware of the light changing. The days are getting much shorter. We might be getting more darkening skies. In the Midwest here, we've had lots of wind, like just massive wind blowing, and the blustery, the trees are shedding their leaves, right? They're letting go, and they're teaching us how to let go. So what I want to talk about is the value of darkness, the value of coming into a deeper relationship with those times of days or those times of years that we're coming into that are really deeply soulful, right? And I'm going to share from a personal experience, and this is going to also be like a video that's about our stories matter. And I've talked about that before. Your story matters. The story of your life's journey, the wisdom that you've grokked, the deeper messages that you have embodied, right? The way that your path unfolds is beautiful and rich, and it becomes the tapestry of your life. And it's a feminine teaching, right? So stories, song, dance, movement, poetry. Stories are ways of the feminine communication style. And oftentimes we look at teachings as, coming from the intellect and conceptual and fact-driven, or what do I get from this? The feminine style allows us to be absorbed in the energy of story, of symbolism, perhaps someone else's story, but then we magically get to reflect on our own connection, our own similarities, those epiphanies that maybe we didn't notice before. So I'm going to approach a lot of this video from the perspective of the story, because the dark time of the year is all about the dark feminine. The dark feminine calls us inward, calls us to connect more deeply to our soul And oftentimes in a culture and in society where, as I've talked about before, we want to be out, right? We're always looking for the next thing to do, the next experience. We want to be energized. We won't only want to feel good. And that's actually imbalanced, and it disconnects us from a whole other realm of who we are. It disconnects us from our holy wholeness, as I call it. So there are people who are introverted. I am one of them, who tend to do well, and be more connected and energized alone and not too overly stimulated. But what I'm talking about today is doing these things consciously. I can be alone all I want, but if I'm not really connected, if I'm sort of still escaping my own inner world, then I'm kind of missing the boat. So, extrovert, introvert doesn't actually matter with what I'm going to talk about. So let's talk about, how do you feel? How do you personally feel when the days start becoming shorter? Do you like that? Does it feel good to you? Are you an autumn, winter person, right? Or are you a spring, summer person? Everybody's constitution is going to be different, and it's going to come into relationship with the fall and the winter in different ways. So that would be more your natural connection to the elements. Okay, your natural connection to, the earth and the water element versus the fire and the air element. Because the dark time of the year is the earth and water elements. It's more grounding. It kind of, you can feel the weightedness of it, right? Like on a cloudy day, we had a really, lusciously dark gray cloudy day yesterday, and dark clouds. And I've grown to really, really appreciate that. It wasn't always that way, though. And it comes in, it's very grounding for me. And if you tend to be a very grounded, slow person in general, it might feel a little bit heavier and less nourishing for you. But again, this is going to depend on your emotional connection and how connected you are to your shadow element, or your the parts of you that you may not be too interested on connecting to, right? So we actually work with all of this in the new moon meditation that's out now. But I'm not gonna go that direction. I'm gonna go to a different direction because that's what we're doing here. So when the darkness comes, the dark time of year, the cold time of year, the environment and Mother Nature is literally guiding us and communicating to us how to stay in a natural, healthy equilibrium and rhythm with the wholeness of all of life. Now, what I can say for me personally, so here's the story part, is historically, I did not like the fall and winter. I'm a summer baby. I was born in June. I'm all about the sun. I was all about the light and the activity. I tend to be highly energized. So that really fed and nourished me. I didn't like being cold. I didn't like being in the dark time of year. I wasn't even crazy about snow. I didn't like when the nights got really long. And and when I was little, it was one situation. As I got into my teens and my early 20s, I had accumulated over time, you know, some not real happy things in my life, right? So my wounds were already flaring. My inner shadow was already flaring. Those parts of me that were hurting. And so what would happen when the days got shorter and the nights got longer and the cold would come, I would start to feel really uncomfortable in my body. I would start to feel anxious. I would start to feel depressed, which I didn't like that feeling. I would start to feel more lonely. I would start to feel more kind of free floating, unknown fear, kind of doom feelings. So for a good portion of this, I drank. So I didn't really feel a lot of it directly. But once I got sober, I became acutely aware of that time of day in particular, particularly going into fall and winter, when it would start becoming dusk. And I was in Portland, Oregon at the time, and if anybody has spent time in Portland, Oregon, then you would know that historically, for sure, like 9 months out of the year, we're in dark, gloomy, cloudy weather. And then we've got like a brief little summer. So it would sort of weigh over me. And I was really grateful during the early days of my sobriety that we always had like a 5:30 meeting, right? So it would be such a relief that I could just go to a meeting and I could sort of skip that dusk period and come back out after the meeting, and it might be almost, dark already, and I'd had my connection. I'd had, the healing salve that a meeting was. But there was a point in time where I started feeling the inner guidance to sit with my experience. And it was not comfortable at first. And I started feeling that inside of me, I had deeper, heavier feelings and thought forms than I knew what to do with. I didn't really know what to do with them. I didn't like them. I wanted to get away from them. I felt like it was wrong to feel heavy. I misunderstood connecting down deep to my inner realm that has a heavier, more what is the right word? Like a heavier, thicker internal presence. I mistaken that for depression. It wasn't depression, but it took me a long time to actually realize that that was the inner realm. That was the soul guidance. That was the soul presence trying to get my attention to let me know I had work to do. I had healing to do. I had clearing to do. And nature was naturally reflecting the time of dying and death to me. It reflects it to all of us. But it's knowing how to listen. It's allowing ourselves to listen. It's allowing ourselves to sit in that stillness or find a way to come into relationship with that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. To find a way to come into relationship with that part of us. Because the soul wants us to come inward. The soul wants to bring healing and wants to bring more wholeness. It wants to pull our energy into our center. The spirit wants to, inspire us, wants to activate us, wants us to, manifest and co-create. And we could say that that's more of an electrical force. That's the sun and the air, and that's the fire and air, which is much more of a masculine expression. It's an outward expression. The soul is water and earth, and it calls us in. It pulls us down to bring us wisdom, to bring us back home, so we can integrate whatever we've been out there doing. So winter, or fall and winter, are these times that Clarissa Pinkola Estes, if you haven't read Women Who Run with Wolves, amazing book on this inner realm and the wisening, the necessity of wisening for our maturity, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And, so it took me quite a while to take baby steps, right? Baby steps of, maybe I'm not going to go to a meeting tonight, and I'm not going to put on a movie to distract myself. Instead, what I started doing was choosing music, like instrumental music. And really what was speaking to me at that time was, I don't know if some of you might know it, Enigma, which was sort of this deep, rhythmic music that was very, it naturally had all of the elements musically to pull you in and pull you down. And it felt a little dark, right? Because that's what was speaking to me, because that's where I was needing to go. I needed to go down to the parts of me that I wouldn't normally look at, that I didn't, want to pay attention to. And so I started a practice of putting that on and just lighting a couple candles. And then maybe dancing or moving. Sometimes I would just clean my apartment. And it doesn't have a lot of, lyrics or vocalizing to distract my brain or to sing. It's more of that music that would allow me to connect with myself rather than pull me out. And then later down the road, as I kind of got better at this phase, and I would recognize that sometimes I would have emotions, right? Sometimes I would start crying. I would feel grief, or I would start to notice things that maybe back when I had been drinking that I had forgotten, and that there was maybe fear connected to that, or deep regret or shame. So what would happen is I would move around and dance or clean, and I'd listen to the music, and emotions would come up, and I would just let them flow. So a couple years later, I began to do this more consciously. Again, this was when I very first started my awakening process, when soul, said, all right, baby, you're ready, we're gonna take you on the big ride. During that time, fall and winter again, I had moved into this kind of dark cubby apartment. It was in the lower ground floor, actually below ground floor. And it didn't have very many windows, and I really didn't like it, but I needed to get something fast because I was coming out of a very challenging, hard, painful relationship, and I just needed to move. So what I started doing then, because I had so much grief built up from the relationship that was connected to other parts of my life, that what I would do is I would sit, and then my music for that time was Mazzy Star. And I would light a candle across the room, and I was still smoking at the time. So I'd light the candle, light my cigarette, have my journal and my tea, and I would just allow myself to cry, to wail, to bawl. All of this grief just poured through. But by this time I had gotten comfortable being able to get quiet enough to hold space for myself, right? I created a sacred container and a sacred practice that would allow the darkening of the year in particular to activate my own inner darkness. And it would take maybe an hour a night. And in the beginning, it was a full hour. And then within probably, I don't know how long really, I don't remember, let's say a month or so, I would be done. I would clear all of that grief within like 10 or 15 minutes. And then I would be left with this deep peace. And that was the turning point when I started recognizing that when I came into stillness, when I came into that inner quietude, when I came into myself, without any distractions, without any need to feel one way or the other, and just allow what was feeling. I didn't judge if I felt sad or even a little depressed, because quite frankly, depression, right, was appropriate. That was an appropriate experience for a period of time coming off of a phase and stage of my life. There was nothing wrong with feeling depressed in that pocket. And I want to say, I'm not telling anybody anything about your personal journey or what you need to do for your mental and emotional health. But what I will say is, from an embodied emotional and mental perspective along the spiritual awakening journey, when we begin to recognize that it is unnatural that we feel good and happy and excited or productive all the time. That is a fallacy. Depression is appropriate for things we have not healed. And depression is the signal to tell us there's more work to do. Okay? So I just want to put that out there. And it doesn't have to be scary. But we have to dismantle the stories around what is okay to feel and what is not okay to feel. And that somehow feeling angry or sad or grief or we should be over something quicker than we are, those are lies. Those are illusions. Most people don't fully heal their wounds. So, we're in a time now over these last few years that this is what we're doing. We're healing trauma. And one of the most empowering ways to work with our grief and our trauma is to learn how to sit and be with it. how to, even if you have to clean, right? You can move if that's what you need to do around, but being focused on allowing feelings to move. Listening to music, listening to things that are actually going to match the shadow, to support the shadow being released. Because then what we start to find is that it's much easier to meditate, it's much easier to be alone, it's much easier to not need to be distracted all the time, to be doing things. It's much easier to relax and not have anxiety about the things that we're not dealing with in here. Because then we begin to recognize, oh, I'm feeling a little anxious. Maybe I'll just sit down, or maybe I'll go sit outside by a tree, or maybe I'll just lay down and watch the clouds and listen to music and see what my soul wants to show me. What is the guidance trying to come through? What is needing to be revealed? What is needing to be released and cleared? Because that is when we start to feel connected to peace inside. Peace is not depression. Peace is not exhaustion. Peace is expansive. And I have an embodied moments that you can find from probably a couple weeks ago that takes us on a journey of peace. And when we can access peace, we feel safe to live in our body, right? We feel safer to live embodied rather than disassociated or scattered through overstimulation. So, so this is the time of year. This is the introduction. This is the threshold. Fall and winter are an initiation into death and rebirth. The death that we're talking about is the death of everything that is truly not you. The death of the weight that holds you down. The parts of you that keep stepping on your cape over and over. The parts of you that are afraid, confused, right? Feel shame, feel guilt. And we work with that in this meditation. We work with moving some of that through and using the light language to help to clear it and anchor in more light, because that's ultimately what we're doing. As we clear all of this out, give it space to talk to you, right? Give it space to be acknowledged. Give it space to say, oh, honey, oh, yeah, I feel that regret. I'm so sorry we're feeling that. How can we support? How can I support you? How can our soul support you? How can the highest self support you to heal that regret and to transmute that energy into a higher expression, a deeper level of peace, a higher expression of truth, not the lies and the illusions that kind of weigh us down, right? So that's going to be it for today. And the invitation for the Scorpio new moon, right, for Samhain, so Samhain, Halloween has sort of been, it's kind of been this a different kind of holiday than what Samhain actually was meant to represent. And what it represents is the dying time of year, right? And then the rebirth begins, it starts percolating at winter solstice, right? Gestating into spring. But the equinox is the time where we start winding down, right? So the invitation is, how can you create a container for you to be in this deep, rich, soulful alignment with your own sacredness, the sacredness deep within you? How can you hold space for your own tenderness, for those parts that feel the fear, the doubt, right? How can you support your own inner listening to gain the wisdom? Wisdom comes from going within, learning how to just be with whatever is showing up. Empowerment comes from this as well. Inner strength comes from this. Courage comes from this. It takes courage to go into the parts of us that have been wounded. It's not an easy task. If it were easy, everybody would do it, and everybody would walk around in a much more whole state of being rather than the wounding state of wounded people wound people, right? Hurt people hurt people. Groups of hurt people hurt groups of other people, because all of this is in here disconnected from, not consciously worked with divine presence, with that grace of divine source love. All right? So the invitation is, come back into your own wholeness. No more denial, pushing yourself away. And we walk through that again in the meditation that I'm going to put below. And I hope that this has served you. I would love to hear any thoughts or feelings about it. And yeah, so have a beautiful crossing over of the threshold into more darkness. And as we get into more darkness, you will begin to find that there's actually a radiant light within the darkness. But I'll leave that up to your exploration and direct experience. All right. Much love, many blessings, many thanks for being here. Be well.